One of my favourite games from the late 80s growing up as a kid was Barbarian the Ultimate Warrior from Palace Software, a fighting game featuring sword-wielding barbarians with the central characters as well as most of the moves and animations, borrowing heavily from the Conan the Barbarian movies. Steve Brown, the lead designer of Palace Software, highly inspired by the 1984 movie Conan the Destroyer and the art style of Frank Frazetta, wrote the story of Drax, an evil sorcerer, out to grab once and for all and for himself the beautiful Princess Mariana. Yep, I totally get that. The only thing that can release her from his claws is the mighty Barbarian, who you must take control of in a series of one-on-one battles against the sorcerer's vessels. If we win, we get the girl. Brown recreated the moves and animations in the game from watching hours of fighting sequences from the Conan the Barbarian movies and borrowed sound samples from another Conan-inspired movie, Red Sonja, most notably for one of the finishing moves called the Flying Neck Chop. Even the music is inspired from the original soundtrack of the 1984 Conan the Barbarian movie. Palace Software also famously hired out bodybuilder Wolf from Gladiators fame and page 3 tabloid sensation Maria Whittaker for the cover art. All that blood and gore along with the sexy cover art stirred up quite a bit of controversy at the time, but it only helped to boost the game's profile, and it wasn't long before it became a massive hit, with just about everyone loving the two-player action and the hilarious decapitations as a little green goblin drags your mate's headless corpse and kicks his detached head off into the depths of the dungeons. After the initial releases, Barbarian was re-released several times with budget label Kix, publishing 3 versions without Maria Whittaker on the covers. In the United States, video game publisher Epex acquired the license to Barbarian and released it under the title Death Sword. There was a total of 10 home computers that got an official release of Barbarian, but there was a few non-official games and fan remakes that were even better than the originals. So for this video, I wanted to showcase the top 10 Barbarian games in order of greatness. So let's jump straight into it with the 10th best game. Released in 2009 by TDB Software, this version is a Windows-only remake and not an official version. It's got a few gameplay issues that really holds it back, and I would have enjoyed it a hell of a lot more if the keyboard controls weren't so awful. The enemy AI is pretty awful too, and it's possible just to spam the low attack right to the end of the game. The best part about this version is the sampled sound effects from the Amiga and the remixed Richard Joseph Barbarian theme tune, which is incredibly good. I really like this Windows Flash remake of Barbarian. I would have loved to see this game fleshed out more because the visuals are the best I've seen out of all the Barbarian games, and the metal-inspired remake of the original Richard Joseph score is really awesome. The big issue with this game is that it plays way too fast and the enemy AI is pretty awful. You can just spam the low attack on every level until you reach the end. It's fun for a while, but the gameplay is a bit too repetitive. In 2012, and on the 25th anniversary of Barbarian, a Mega Drive, PC Engine and Windows clone was made available by a huge fan of the original 1987 game. This is a clone of the Amiga version running on a Mega Drive, which basically reprograms the Amiga assets to run on the Mega Drive Genesis hardware. There seems to be a good bit of lag between the input and when your move is executed on screen, giving it a kind of slippery feel, which does affect the gameplay, but other than that, it really is an impressive piece of programming. I've left a link in the description below to FL's website where you can download your favourite clone on each system the game was released on, including a brand new Windows only version. The official Amstrad version plays well enough, but the 128K remake shown later on in the video really makes this version kind of lazy from the developers. The colours are pretty dull and there's only one backdrop, that being Drax's throne room. They didn't include the princess in the backgrounds either, and when you take on the sorcerer in the final stage, he's both sitting in his throne and throwing out fireballs at the same time. The speccy version seen here plays really well, and if it wasn't for the low quality sound samples and monochrome colours, I'd definitely rate it higher. It had some of the best visuals on the 8-bit systems with slightly larger sprites showing more detail, and it also must take first prize for having the most attractive version of the bikini clad princess, with the final pose mirroring the cover art for the game. This Amstrad version plays a little bit faster than the Commodore 64, and although it's not the official Amstrad version, this 128K remake had a really impressive colour palette as well as a very cool digitised loading screen of Maria Whittaker, sadly not seen in any other release of the game. As mentioned, the colours are really impressive in this version, but the main sprites and backgrounds are a little more pixelated and blocky compared to the Commodore 64. The sound samples and music are much better quality than the specky version, but again not quite as good as the Commodore 64. It also includes the Richard Joseph theme tune between each battle. The Atari ST version looked a lot more impressive than the 8-bit versions, but it wasn't quite as detailed as the Amiga version. The sampled sound effects, however, were miles better than any of the other 8-bit systems. There was no sampled speech, but the ST had its own unique sampled effects that were as good as the Amiga version. However, the lack of music or any kind of audio in between each battle really hurt the overall experience. This is the Commodore 64 version I put countless hours into as a kid, and it was also the very first release of Barbarian with all the others coming after it. The graphics were not quite as good as the 16-bit versions, but the animations were smoother than the 8-bit versions, and I actually preferred the slightly slower speed because it was much easier to parry, and of course it made those hilarious decapitations all the more satisfying. It also had that great Barbarian theme tune composed by Richard Joseph that kicked in between each battle, and for me this really was one of the best Conan-inspired theme tunes written for any 8-bit system. Well, it really is not much of a surprise that the Amiga version is the top of the pack with the best detail on the visuals along with some awesome sound and voice samples throughout the game. The sound is not only much crisper than the ST, but it also had some additional voice samples like the voices heard at the start of each fight announcing your impending death. It really is a joy listening to some of the sound and voice samples. I really can't think of a game other than maybe Golden Axe that did it more perfectly.
Prepare to die.
Although it's a fan remake made in 2018, I thought I'd include this one in too because it's just so awesome what they've done here, and you can tell the creators really love making this game, and like me were a big fan of the original franchise. The visuals have got a complete overhaul and look even better than the original Amiga version with a much cleaner, less pixelated HD look. They actually improved this game in every department, which is no easy feat. There's different types of warriors to fight, new boss battles, cutscenes, new backdrops and new music. It plays fantastic too, with the enemy AI a little more forgiving than the original Amiga version. There's heaps of fan service here, and if you've ever played the sequel Barbarian 2, you will instantly recognise one of the boss characters near the end of the game, and all I will say is he's a real challenge to beat. That's a wrap for this video guys. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to sub so you can catch the next video when it's uploaded. I've also left links in the description so you can play some of these awesome Barbarian games on Windows or on your favourite emulator.
Prepare to die.